I'm Carrie. Standing on the stage of the Austin Business Journal's 40 Under 40 Gala, I could feel the spotlight warming my face. The Crystal Award in my hands was heavier than it looked. As I looked out at the 400 faces in the audience, I couldn't help but think back to 2 years ago when I was holding a $500 check in a Ritz-Carlton ballroom. I grew up in a small town in Maine. The town was quiet, with every house on a well-maintained street and a picket fence in front. Our family home was a 3-story colonial by the lake. From the outside, we seemed like the perfect family. My parents, Richard and Linda, were in their late 50s. Richard was a successful lawyer, and Linda was a well-known community volunteer. My older sister, Ava, was the apple of my parents' eyes. She was 32, a Harvard-educated investment banker. She had always been high-achieving, with a string of academic and professional successes. My parents constantly boasted about her at every family gathering and social event. Meanwhile, I was the dreamer. I loved graphic design. I won a few local design contests in high school, but my parents saw it as a mere hobby, a waste of time in their eyes. They believed that a stable, high-paying job was the only path to success. After graduating from the local university, I landed a job as a junior graphic designer at a small agency. It wasn't a high-profile position, but I loved it. The problem was the car. I needed a vehicle to commute to clients' places, but my credit was poor. So, my parents co-signed for a $20,000 Hyundai Elantra. It became a noose around my neck. Every time I expressed my desire to try something new, like switching to freelance design, my mother would remind me of the car loan. "You still owe us for that car, Carrie. Don't be so irresponsible." My father would just nod in agreement. I met Jake at a local coffee shop. He was 30, a freelance web developer. His parents divorced when he was young, and he had to work hard to make a living. He was a self-taught programmer and had built a small but loyal clientele. He was ambitious but in a different way from what my parents understood. He just wanted to create something meaningful. When my parents found out about Jake, they were far from pleased. One Sunday dinner, my mother said, "A freelance web developer? That's not a real job." She looked at me with disappointment, as if I had made a huge mistake. At that time, Ava got engaged to Andrew, a partner at a top law firm. My parents spared no expense for her engagement party. They rented a large hall, hired a caterer, and invited all their friends and colleagues. "Ava found a partner who matches her status," my mother said, glancing at Jake. Jake didn't show it, but I could tell he was hurt. 5 weeks before Ava's wedding, Jake proposed. It was a simple and intimate moment at our small apartment. There were no fancy settings or expensive rings. It was just him, me, and a promise of a future together. I said yes without hesitation. When we told my family, Ava forced a smile, and my father mumbled a congratulations before going back to his newspaper. My mother looked at the ring for a second and then immediately focused on Ava's wedding preparations. Ava's wedding was a grand affair, held at the Ritz-Carlton. The ballroom was decorated with crystal chandeliers and flowers imported from Holland. There were over 200 guests in attendance. I arrived in a $99 black dress I bought on sale. I was assigned to manage the guest book table, away from the main action, away from the limelight. After the ceremony, I was doing my job, greeting guests and handing out pens. One of my mother's aunts looked at me and said, "Oh, you're Carrie. Linda always talks about Ava." I just smiled and nodded. Jake was seated at a table in the back, next to some of Andrew's colleagues who were engrossed in talks about stocks and law cases. During the reception, I left the guest book table to find Jake. As I was walking across the ballroom, my mother pulled me to a corner near the bar. "I know you and Jake are planning your wedding," she said. She pressed a white envelope into my hand. I opened it and saw a $500 check with wedding contribution written on the memo line. "That's all you deserve," she whispered, barely audible over the music. A waiter nearby paused, and a woman at a nearby table glanced over and quickly looked away. I folded the check and put it in my clutch. I looked my mother in the eye but didn't say a word. I walked back to Jake's table. Jake saw my face and reached for my hand under the table. "What happened?" he asked. "Later," I said. But it didn't take long for the situation to escalate. 10 minutes later, my mother came to our table. She had clearly had a few more drinks. She looked at Jake and said, "I hope you're not expecting us to fund your wedding. We don't invest in dead ends." The table fell silent. Jake didn't move, but I could see the anger in his eyes. I stood up and said, "We're leaving. And I need to refinance that car loan tomorrow." Jake nodded and followed me out. By the next morning, my phone was bombarded with missed calls from my father and texts from Ava. She said I had ruined her wedding, that people were asking where I went. My mother said nothing. It was as if her silence was a punishment. Jake and I sat at our kitchen table, looking at the refinancing options on his laptop. My credit score was 690, just enough to qualify for a higher interest loan. "If we go through this credit union, the loan will be transferred to your name, and we'll have a clean break," Jake said. Over the next few days, my mother spread the story that I had left the wedding out of jealousy. Aunt Lucy, my father's sister, who was always kind-hearted, called me and told me what my mother was saying. I was heartbroken but also determined. I decided that I wouldn't let her words define me. After the wedding, we decided to move to Austin. The reason was simple: no state income tax, a lower cost of living, and a vibrant startup culture. We packed our few belongings into the Elantra and drove away with only $4,500 in our bank account. Our first apartment in Austin was a tiny studio with a leaky roof and a noisy refrigerator. The rent was $800 a month, and we could barely afford it. I started working as a barista at a local coffee shop, earning minimum wage plus tips. In the evenings, I would work on freelance design projects on Upwork. In the beginning, the work was slow. I was mainly doing small jobs like logo designs for local shops, earning a few $100s a month. Jake was also struggling to find new clients. One month, we had to live on instant noodles because we couldn't afford proper groceries. But then, something happened. I met a marketing consultant named Grace at the coffee shop. She saw some of my work on my laptop and was impressed. She told me she had 2 clients who needed brand overhauls and would refer me if I could present a proper proposal and register an LLC. I knew it was a huge opportunity. That night, Jake and I sat at our rickety table and registered Carey Design LLC. It cost us $350, almost half of our remaining savings. But we knew it was an investment. Over the next 2 days, I worked day and night to create proposals for the 2 clients. I set a reasonable price, remembering what Grace had said about valuing my work. Both clients accepted my proposals, and I landed contracts worth a total of $10,000. Things started to pick up from there. By the end of the year, we had expanded our business. I hired a part-time copywriter and a graphic designer. We moved to a bigger office on Congress Avenue. One day, Ava and my parents came to Austin. Ava's husband, Andrew, had gotten a job transfer, and they had sold their expensive house in Maine at a loss. While they were driving around, Ava pointed out our office. My mother saw the name Carey Design LLC on the glass door and was stunned into silence. At the 40 Under 40 gala, when my name was called, 400 people applauded. As I stood on the stage, I saw my mother, Ava, and Andrew sitting a few tables away. My mother's champagne glass stopped halfway to her lips. I didn't look at them for long. I knew that my success was not about proving them wrong. It was about believing in myself and building a life that I wanted. After the gala, I received an email from my father. He apologized for not standing up for me in the past and said he wanted to have coffee with me. A few weeks later, Ava texted me, apologizing for her past behavior. I didn't hold any grudges. I knew that life was about moving forward. Now, as I look around my office, with its framed client work on the walls and the Crystal Award shining on my desk, I realize that my mother was right about one thing. I did deserve exactly what I got, not the $500, but the fire inside me that pushed me to create something of my own.